There's something almost comical about it when you think about the panic that gripped the world in March 2020. Not panic over the virus itself, though that was terrifying enough. No, this was panic over toilet paper. Grocery store shelves stripped bare. People fighting over the last pack of Charmin. Amazon sold out for months. Security guards stationed in the paper goods aisle. An Australian newspaper literally printing extra pages as emergency toilet paper. All of this frenzy over what is essentially just soft paper on a roll. But here's the fascinating part. For most of human history, and for most people alive today, toilet paper doesn't exist at all. It's a relatively recent invention, and one that's confined largely to Western countries and a handful of others. Only about 30% of the world's population uses toilet paper. The rest, they've found other ways, some of them thousands of years old, and arguably more hygienic than what we're doing with our rolls of processed tree pulp. So let's pull back the curtain on this most private of products. Let's explore the dirty secrets of toilet paper, from the Stone Age to the modern age, from ancient Roman communal sponges to Japanese high-tech bidets, from environmental catastrophe to pandemic panic buying. Because the story of how we clean ourselves after using the bathroom is, strange as it sounds, the story of civilization itself. Long before anyone conceived of toilet paper as we know it, humans had to figure out the fundamental problem of post-bathroom cleanliness. And the solutions they came up with range from the practical to the bizarre, from the painful to the surprisingly sophisticated. In very ancient times, people used whatever was closest at hand, literally. Smooth stones were popular across many cultures because they were abundant, reusable after washing, and got the job done. Leaves worked well if you lived near forests. Moss was a favourite in damp climates. In coastal regions, people reached for mussel shells, which had the advantage of a smooth surface. Animal furs were used by some hunter-gatherer societies, though one imagines this was reserved for the less luxurious pelts. But let's be honest about something. None of these materials would pass muster by modern hygiene standards. Imagine scraping your most sensitive areas with a rock, even a smooth rock. The ancient Greeks actually had a specific term for these stones: pessoi. They would use 3 stones per visit, a practice that must have required some skill to execute without causing injury. The texture of these stones, even when smoothed by river water over centuries, was rough enough that modern medical researchers believe they may have contributed to hemorrhoids among ancient populations. The Greeks also used broken pottery fragments called ostraka. Now here's where it gets interesting, and reveals something about human nature that hasn't changed in thousands of years. The Greeks would sometimes inscribe the names of their enemies on these ceramic shards before using them. Think about that for a moment. They were quite literally wiping their backsides with the names of people they didn't like. It was ancient trash talk taken to its most visceral extreme. Archaeologists have found ostraka with names scratched onto them, and while we can't be certain all of them were used for bathroom purposes, the historical record is pretty clear about this practice. It's the ancient equivalent of toilet paper printed with your enemy's face, which, believe it or not, is something you can actually buy today. The Romans, being Romans, decided to innovate. They developed public toilets that were architectural marvels for their time, stone or marble benches with holes cut into them, arranged in rows with running water beneath to carry away waste. But here's the thing that shocks modern sensibilities. There were no dividers, no privacy whatsoever. You would sit right next to your fellow citizens, rubbing elbows while conducting your business. The wealthy and powerful viewed these facilities with disdain and rarely used them, but for common Romans, it was a normal part of daily life. And what did Romans use to clean themselves? The tessorium, which sounds dignified until you learn what it actually was: a sponge attached to a stick. Now, that might sound like an improvement over stones, and in terms of comfort it probably was. But here's the horrifying detail. These sponges were communal. Everyone in the public toilet used the same sponge on a stick. After each use, the sponge would be rinsed in a bucket of vinegar or salt water, and then it was the next person's turn. Think about the germs, the bacteria, the diseases that must have spread through this system. We're talking about an era with no understanding of germ theory, no knowledge of how disease is transmitted. The Roman historian Seneca recorded a story about a gladiator who killed himself by grabbing one of these communal sponges and shoving it down his throat. It's a grim anecdote, but it tells us that even Romans found these sponges unpleasant enough that death by sponge stick became a thing someone actually did. Some evidence from Herculaneum, one of the towns buried by Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, suggests that wealthy Romans might have used small fragments of cloth. Archaeologists found pieces of fabric in the ancient sewers. But as environmental archaeologist Erica Rowan points out, cloth was made entirely by hand in antiquity, making it incredibly valuable. Using cloth to wipe yourself would have been like using the most expensive 3-ply toilet paper available today. It was decadent, a mark of extreme wealth. Meanwhile, across the ancient world in China, a very different bathroom culture was developing. The Chinese had been making paper since the 2nd century BC, and it didn't take long before someone had the brilliant idea to use it for personal hygiene. The first historical reference to using paper for bathroom purposes comes from the 6th century, when the scholar official Yan Zhitui wrote disapprovingly about people who used paper with quotations or text on it for toilet purposes. By the 14th century, China was mass-producing toilet paper, manufacturing more than 10 million sheets annually in some provinces alone. The imperial family in Beijing had access to large, soft, perfumed sheets of paper created specifically for their use. This was happening while Europe was still in the Middle Ages, and Europeans were using, well, pretty much anything they could find. Which brings us to a period of history that's often unfairly characterised as filthy and backward, but which was actually more nuanced than the stereotype suggests. In ancient Egypt, things were surprisingly sophisticated in some ways. The wealthy used wooden or stone toilet seats with a hole in the middle, positioned over a jar or box of sand that would catch waste. There's evidence that some Egyptian homes had early drainage systems. A 2,700-year-old toilet found in Jerusalem shows that the elite had private bathrooms with smooth limestone seats and deep septic tanks. Only the rich could afford such luxuries. Most people made do with far more primitive arrangements or simply went outside. The Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished from about 3300 to 1300 BC in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, had remarkably advanced sanitation systems. Archaeological excavations at sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa reveal sophisticated drainage systems, with toilets in private homes connected to covered drains that ran along the streets. These were some of the world's first flushing toilets, using water to carry waste away. The system was so well engineered that it wouldn't be matched in Europe for thousands of years. At Skara Brae in Scotland, a Neolithic settlement occupied from about 3100 to 2500 BC, some houses had drains running directly beneath them, with small cubicles built over the drains. These were essentially primitive toilets, and they predate the Roman Empire by thousands of years, so the image of our ancient ancestors as primitive and unclean doesn't hold up to archaeological scrutiny. They were trying to solve the same problems we are, just with different tools and knowledge. But what they all had in common was this: they had to figure out how to clean themselves after using these facilities. Water was the preferred method in many ancient cultures, particularly in regions where it was abundant. India, the Middle East, and parts of Asia developed water-based cleaning traditions that continue to this day. The left hand was designated for this purpose, which is why many cultures consider it rude to eat or shake hands with your left hand. The medieval period gets a bad reputation for hygiene, and in some ways it's deserved. But the reality is more complicated and in many ways more interesting than the stereotype of unwashed peasants living in filth. The truth is that bathroom habits in medieval Europe varied wildly depending on your social class, where you lived, and what resources were available to you. For the wealthy, there was a bizarre and fascinating court position that tells us everything about how differently they approach bathroom matters. It was called the groom of the stool, or the groom of the king's close stool, and it was one of the most prestigious positions in the royal court. The job was exactly what it sounds like, attending to the king while he was on the toilet. The groom would prepare the royal toilet, which was called a close stool, and was basically an elaborate chamber pot enclosed in a box or cabinet that could be moved from room to room. The groom would also provide water, towels and wash bowls. They would even wipe the royal behind if required. Now, before you think this sounds like the worst job in history, here's the twist. It was actually a path to power. The groom of the stool had intimate access to the king, spending time with him in his most private moments. This meant they could have the king's ear, could influence decisions, could rise through the ranks of nobility. Many noblemen's sons applied for the position specifically to gain this access. Some grooms of the stool became powerful secretaries and advisors. The position existed in England for centuries, lasting until 1901 when King Edward VII finally abolished it. For the wealthy who didn't have personal groomsmen, there were guardrobes. These were essentially early toilets built into castles and manor houses. A guardrobe was typically a small room projecting from the outer wall of the building, with a wooden or stone seat that had a hole cut into it. Below the seat was a shaft that dropped straight down, either to a pit below, to a moat, or sometimes just to the outside of the castle wall. Gravity did the work of disposal. Guardrobes were positioned away from bedrooms because of the smell, and often near kitchens or fireplaces to keep them warm. There's something both practical and deeply unpleasant about that arrangement. The warmth made the experience more comfortable, but it also meant that cooking smells and bathroom smells mingled in ways that modern sensibilities find disturbing. Yet this was normal for the medieval wealthy class. But here's something that challenges our assumptions about medieval people being ignorant of hygiene. They knew enough to avoid doing their business in certain places. Despite having these guardrobe facilities, historical records show that people sometimes refused to use them. There are accounts of people relieving themselves in dark corners, behind curtains, in empty fireplaces, even in friends' houses where presumably no guardrobe was available or convenient. This suggests that medieval people were actually quite particular about where and how they conducted their bathroom business, even if their standards were different from ours. The common people, of course, had no such luxuries. They used chamber pots, which were exactly what they sound like, pots kept in the bedroom or elsewhere in the house that people would use as toilets. These pots had to be emptied, usually first thing in the morning. In cities, there were strict rules about where you could and couldn't dump the contents of chamber pots. Ideally, they should be emptied into cesspits or carried to designated waste areas. In reality, people often just threw the contents out the window into the street, sometimes with a warning shout, sometimes not. This created a system where cities literally had rivers of waste running through the streets. The smell must have been overwhelming by modern standards, though people at the time were used to it. Streets weren't paved, so waste soaked into the ground, creating a breeding ground for disease. When it rained, the rainwater was supposed to wash the waste away. But as urban populations grew, the sheer volume overwhelmed the natural drainage. By the 16th century, cities were digging cesspools and cesspits into the ground near houses to collect waste. Pipes would connect primitive latrines to these pits. Workers called gong farmers or night soil men would come after dark to pump out the liquid waste and shovel out the solid waste. This waste, euphemistically called night soil, was sold as fertilizer for farms. It was a whole economy built around human excrement, and it functioned more or less for centuries. But what about the actual wiping? What did medieval Europeans use? The answer is, whatever was available. The wealthy might use wool or cloth, materials that could be washed and reused. Wool was particularly popular because it was soft and absorbent. The less wealthy used hay, straw, or moss. Leaves were common in rural areas. In coastal regions, mussel shells remained popular. One material that became increasingly common as paper making spread through Europe in the 12th century was paper itself, but not paper made for toilet use. People used whatever paper they had. Old documents, manuscript pages, anything that was no longer needed for its original purpose. But paper was still expensive and relatively rare. So this was not an option for most people. The Farmer's Almanac became a bathroom staple in America and elsewhere, not just for reading but for use after reading. The almanac publishers eventually started printing their books with a hole pre-drilled in the corner so they could be hung from a nail in the outhouse. People would tear off pages as needed. The practice became so common that it's mentioned in countless historical accounts and memoirs. Corn cobs were another American innovation, or perhaps more accurately, an American improvisation. After corn became a staple crop, dried corn cobs turned out to make surprisingly effective toilet paper. They were soft enough not to cause injury, but rough enough to clean effectively. Americans used corn cobs well into the 20th century, particularly in rural areas. Old-timers who grew up using corn cobs in outhouses claim they worked better than early commercial toilet paper, which was often rough and splintery. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, different traditions continued. In much of Asia, water remained the preferred cleaning method. In Japan, wooden sticks called chugi were used, somewhat similar to the Chinese hygiene sticks found along the Silk Road. These were spatula-like implements made from bamboo or other wood, shaped specifically for the purpose. They could be washed and reused, making them economical. In 1992, archaeologists discovered 2,000-year-old hygiene sticks in latrines at a Han Dynasty military base in China. Analysis of material on the sticks provided researchers with information about ancient diets and, less pleasantly, ancient parasites. The Islamic world developed elaborate water-based cleaning traditions based on religious requirements for purity. Islamic law requires washing with water after using the toilet, which led to the development of various water vessels and eventually the handheld bidet showers that are standard in Middle Eastern bathrooms today. The left hand is used for washing, which is why eating or greeting with the left hand is considered unclean in Islamic cultures. In India, a similar water-based tradition developed, using a small vessel called a lota. The practice involves pouring water with the right hand while cleaning with the left, a technique that requires some practice to master without getting yourself or your clothes wet. This tradition continues in India today, which is why toilet paper is still relatively rare in Indian bathrooms. So by the time we reach the 19th century and the dawn of the industrial age, the world has thousands of years of bathroom traditions, each culture developing its own solutions to this universal human need. But everything is about to change. Someone in America is about to have an idea that will revolutionize bathroom hygiene in the Western world and eventually spread across the globe for better or worse. That person is Joseph Gayetty, and the year is 1857. On December 8, 1857, in New York City, a man named Joseph Gayetty began marketing a product that would change bathroom habits forever, though not immediately, and not in the way he probably expected. Gayetty's product was toilet paper, but not as we know it today. These were loose, flat sheets of paper, each one measuring about 4 inches by 6 inches, and each one watermarked with his name, J.C. Gayetty N.Y. Yes, you read that correctly. Every single sheet had his name on it. Imagine buying toilet paper with the manufacturer's name printed on every square, and then imagine using it. It's one of history's stranger marketing decisions, but Gayetty was proud of his product and wanted everyone to know who created it. The paper itself was made from pure manila hemp, a durable fibre that made for relatively soft paper by the standards of the day. But what made Gayetty's product special, at least in his mind, was that each sheet was infused with aloe. He marketed his Gayetty's medicated paper not as a general hygiene product, but as a medical device specifically designed to prevent and treat hemorrhoids. The original advertisements proclaimed it the greatest necessity of the age and warned about the dangers of using toxic inked papers on sensitive body parts, a reference to the common practice of using newspaper or catalogue pages as toilet paper. Here's the thing about Gayetty's product. It should have been a slam dunk. He was solving a real problem with a purpose-designed solution. The paper was softer than most alternatives. It was medicated with aloe, which actually does have soothing properties. He advertised extensively, taking out ads in newspapers and magazines. He sold 500 sheets for 50 cents, which was affordable by the standards of the day, and it failed, almost completely. Why? Several reasons, and they tell us a lot about American society in the mid-19th century. First, people were used to getting their toilet paper for free. The Sears Roebuck catalogue arrived in millions of homes, thick with pages that could be torn out and used. Newspapers were cheap and plentiful. Old letters, used envelopes, any kind of paper could work. Why pay 50 cents for Gayetty's sheets when you had free alternatives at hand? Second, and perhaps more importantly, Americans were deeply embarrassed about bodily functions. Talking about toilet paper, or even buying it in a store, was considered improper. The late 19th century was a time of intense prudishness about anything related to the body. The very idea of walking into a store and asking for toilet paper was mortifying for most people. They would rather endure the rough texture of newspaper than face that social embarrassment. Third, Gayetty was selling his product as a medical device, which brought medical scrutiny. Several medical societies attacked him as a quack. In an era when patent medicine salesmen were everywhere, making wild claims about miracle cures, Gayetty's hemorrhoid prevention claims were met with skepticism. This hurt his reputation and made people even less likely to buy his product. But Gayetty was stubborn. He continued to market his medicated paper for years. In 1860, the census listed him as working in the medicated paper industry. By then he had 5 children, a servant, and a modest estate valued at $1,000, so the business was providing an income, just not the revolutionary success he probably hoped for. The Gayetty name remained on toilet paper products into the 20th century, though Joseph himself died in 1895. His son Henry took over the business and became embroiled in a trademark dispute in 1891, showing that there was at least enough value in the Gayetty name to fight over. Meanwhile, other inventors were trying to crack the toilet paper problem. In England, a man named Walter Alcock tried to sell toilet paper in rolls rather than flat sheets. His innovation went nowhere. The social stigma was too strong, and the market wasn't ready. Then, in 1871, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Seth Wheeler of Albany, New York, received a patent for improvement in wrapping papers, which sounds boring until you learn what the improvement was: perforations. Wheeler invented perforated toilet paper on a roll. You could unroll as much as you needed and tear it off at the perforation. This was a genuine innovation, making toilet paper more convenient and economical. But even Wheeler's brilliant invention didn't immediately catch on. The social barriers were still too strong. It took 2 brothers from Philadelphia to finally crack the code and turn toilet paper into the household staple it is today. Their names were Irvin and Clarence Scott, and their strategy was genius in its simplicity. The Scott brothers, running the Scott Paper Company, realized that they needed to bypass the social stigma entirely. Instead of trying to convince individual consumers to buy toilet paper, they would sell to institutions. In 1890, they began marketing toilet paper on rolls to hotels, restaurants, and other businesses. These establishments needed toilet paper, and buying it wholesale was a business expense, not a personal embarrassment. Businesses didn't care about social stigma, they cared about functionality and cost. This strategy worked brilliantly. Hotels and restaurants started installing toilet paper in their bathrooms. Travellers and diners used it and found it convenient. Slowly, gradually, the idea that toilet paper was normal and useful began to spread to individual consumers. The Scott brothers also packaged their product discreetly, so pharmacists could sell it without embarrassment. They marketed it delicately, avoiding crude or explicit descriptions. By the early 1900s, toilet paper was becoming more common in American homes, though it was still far from universal. Rural areas stuck with catalogues and corn cobs for decades longer. But in cities and towns, especially among the middle and upper classes, toilet paper was becoming standard. There was just one problem: splinters. Yes, you read that right. Splinters in toilet paper. The manufacturing process for early toilet paper left wood splinters embedded in the sheets. Think about that for a moment. Imagine the discomfort, the pain, the potential for infection. People tolerated this because the alternative was going back to newspapers and catalogues, which were even rougher. But it was not a great situation. It wasn't until 1935, more than 70 years after Gayetty's first attempt, that Northern Tissue finally perfected a manufacturing process that produced splinter-free toilet paper. They advertised this achievement proudly, and it was a genuine selling point. Splinter-free, the ads proclaimed, and people were genuinely excited about this innovation. That tells you something about what they had been dealing with before. As toilet paper became more common and less embarrassing to buy, manufacturers began to compete on features. Softness became a major selling point. Multi-ply paper with 2 or 3 layers bonded together offered more comfort and strength. Colours were introduced, though white remained the standard. Patterns were embossed into the paper for aesthetics and absorbency. Some companies added perfumes, though this never really caught on widely. One innovation that did succeed was the cardboard tube at the centre of the roll, which made the paper easier to store and dispense. The toilet paper holder, a simple spring-loaded rod or other device to hold the roll, became a standard bathroom fixture. And this led to one of the great debates of modern civilization. Should toilet paper hang with the loose end over the roll or under the roll? Seth Wheeler's original patent drawing actually shows the paper hanging over, leading over advocates to claim this as proof of the correct orientation. Under advocates point to practical advantages, especially in households with cats or small children who like to bat at the roll and send it spinning. This debate has consumed more time and energy than it probably deserves, spawning studies, arguments, and even heated family disputes. Hotels almost always hang it over. It's considered more convenient and hygienic, but in homes both methods persist, and neither side shows any sign of surrendering. Through the early 20th century, toilet paper spread across America and began to make inroads in Europe, though European adoption was slower. Many European countries already had bidets, and the tradition of water-based cleaning was strong. But gradually, toilet paper made progress even there. By the mid-20th century, toilet paper had become so normal in America that the very idea of not having it seemed barbaric. When Americans travelled abroad and encountered toilets without paper, they were shocked and often disgusted. The cultural norm had completely flipped. What had once been too embarrassing to discuss was now considered an absolute necessity of civilized life. But this normalization came with consequences that nobody in the industry wanted to talk about. Because making toilet paper requires trees, lots and lots of trees, and as demand grew, as the product spread around the world, as manufacturers competed to make softer, thicker, more luxurious paper, the environmental cost began to mount in ways that would eventually become impossible to ignore. Here's a number that should make you uncomfortable. 27,000 trees are cut down every single day to make toilet paper. That's not a typo. 27,000 trees, daily, just so we can wipe ourselves and flush the paper away. Let's put that in perspective. An average American uses about 384 trees worth of toilet paper in their lifetime. The United States consumes about 15 million trees per year for toilet paper alone. Globally, the numbers are even more staggering. Despite the fact that only about 30% of the world's population uses toilet paper, we're still cutting down enough trees to fill a small forest every single day. According to the Natural Resources Defense Council, toilet paper constitutes less than 10% of all paper production, but accounts for 15% of deforestation. Think about that ratio. Toilet paper is a small fraction of the paper industry, but it drives a disproportionate amount of forest destruction. Why? Because the major toilet paper manufacturers insist on using virgin pulp, meaning paper made directly from trees rather than recycled materials. The companies will tell you that virgin pulp makes for softer, stronger, more luxurious toilet paper, and that's technically true. But it's also technically true that we're destroying irreplaceable old-growth forests to achieve that extra bit of softness, and when you actually think about what we're using it for, the trade-off starts to seem insane. The forests being destroyed aren't just any forests. They're some of the most important ecosystems on Earth. The Canadian boreal forest, which encircles the Arctic across Canada's northern regions, is the largest land ecosystem on the planet and one of the largest carbon-dense forests. These are forests where some trees are centuries old, where the ecosystem has developed over thousands of years into a delicate balance of plants, animals, insects, microbes, and fungi. When you clear-cut a boreal forest, you're not just cutting down trees, you're destroying an entire network of life. Species that depend on old-growth forest can't survive in younger replanted forests. The soil structure changes, the water systems are disrupted, and all that carbon that was locked up in the trees and soil gets released into the atmosphere, contributing to climate change. Every year, logging in Canada's boreal forest releases approximately 26 million metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That's roughly equivalent to a quarter of all the carbon emissions from every car and truck in the United States. Just from cutting down trees to make toilet paper and other tissue products, Kimberly-Clark, the maker of Cottonelle and Scott toilet paper, gets about 22% of its pulp from producers who cut trees in the Canadian boreal forest. Procter & Gamble, maker of Charmin, is similarly dependent on virgin boreal pulp. Georgia-Pacific, another major producer, has been called out repeatedly by environmental groups for its reliance on old-growth forest pulp. In 2009, Greenpeace launched a campaign against Kimberly-Clark called Clear Cut, drawing attention to the company's logging practices in Canada's ancient boreal forests. The campaign eventually contributed to the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement in 2010, which set aside a Texas-sized chunk of forest for conservation. But that was after decades of logging, and the agreement doesn't protect all of the boreal forest, just a portion of it. The boreal forest isn't the only victim. Forests in the southeastern United States have also been heavily logged for toilet paper production. More than half of the trees in these forests are now less than 40 years old, a sure sign of extensive logging and replanting. Old-growth forests, which take centuries to develop, have been largely eliminated. Indonesia's rainforests have been targeted as well. In 2012, a World Wildlife Fund report focusing on Sumatra revealed devastating consequences from logging by APP, which was the fifth largest toilet paper producer in the world at the time. Rainforests that provided habitat for orangutans, tigers, elephants, and thousands of other species were being cleared for pulp plantations. Even Sweden's Great North Forest, once thought to be protected by sustainable forestry practices, is at risk. Over 60% of all forest in Sweden is now less than 60 years old, too young to be mature forest. Only 7.5% is officially protected. The clear-cutting has led to declines in hundreds of forest species, including plants, animals, fungi and lichens. All of this destruction is driven by our demand for soft, fluffy, absorbent toilet paper, the quilted stuff, the ultra-soft stuff, the stuff with the puppies on the package that makes you think you're making a wholesome choice. But the environmental cost doesn't stop with deforestation. The manufacturing process itself is resource-intensive and polluting. It takes 1.7 trillion litres of water to produce the toilet paper that America uses in a single year. That's trillion with a T. The water is used for pulping, processing and manufacturing. The paper pulp has to be bleached to make it white, and that bleaching process uses 250,000 tons of bleach annually, just for American toilet paper production. Until the mid-1990s, most manufacturers used elemental chlorine for bleaching, which released dioxins, highly toxic compounds that cause air and water pollution and don't degrade easily in the environment. Dioxins are carcinogenic and can cause serious health problems in both animals and humans. Today, most manufacturers have switched to elemental chlorine-free processes, but these still release chlorine byproducts that are harmful to the environment. The bleaching process creates wastewater that has to be treated before it can be released, and even after treatment, it contains chemicals that can affect aquatic ecosystems. Then there's the energy required to manufacture toilet paper. The pulping process requires heating water and chemicals to break down wood fibres. The paper then has to be dried, which requires massive amounts of heat. The entire manufacturing process is energy intensive, and much of that energy comes from fossil fuels, adding to greenhouse gas emissions. And after all that environmental damage to produce it, what do we do with toilet paper? We flush it away. It goes to sewage treatment plants where it has to be processed, and eventually ends up in landfills or, in the best case, is broken down through biological processes. The whole system is designed for single use and immediate disposal. Compare this to recycled toilet paper, which uses paper that's already been produced, saving trees and reducing the energy and water requirements significantly. The US Environmental Protection Agency recommends choosing recycled toilet paper containing 20 to 60% post-consumer recycled content and 20 to 100% recovered fibre. This type of paper uses far less water and energy to produce, doesn't require cutting down any trees, and is perfectly functional for its intended purpose. But here's the problem. Major toilet paper brands score terribly on recycled content. A 2019 report card by the Natural Resources Defense Council found that Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, and Georgia-Pacific, the three biggest tissue producers, still produce toilet paper using virgin pulp from old-growth forests. Many of their brands contain zero recycled content and lack Forest Stewardship Council certification, which would at least indicate that the wood comes from responsibly managed forests. Georgia-Pacific even introduced a brand called Quilted Northern Eco Comfort, which sounds environmentally friendly, but contains no recycled content and has no FSC certification. This is a textbook example of greenwashing, making a product sound environmentally responsible when it's anything but. The environmental community has been pushing for change. Organisations like the NRDC, Greenpeace, World Wildlife Fund, and others have launched campaigns to pressure major toilet paper manufacturers to stop using virgin old-growth forest pulp. Some progress has been made. More recycled options are available now than in the past. Some manufacturers have committed to sustainable forestry practices. But the fundamental problem remains. We're cutting down ancient forests to make a product that we use once and flush away. The average person uses 6 or 7 kilograms of toilet paper per year. Americans use even more, averaging about 23.6 rolls per person annually, which is more than any other country except Japan. China, with a population 4 times larger than the United States, consumes more toilet paper in total, but less per person. Still, the rise of toilet paper use in China and other developing countries means that global consumption is increasing rapidly, putting even more pressure on forests. The rise of the middle class in developing countries creates more demand for consumer goods like toilet paper. As incomes rise, people who previously used water or other methods switch to toilet paper, seeing it as a mark of modern civilization. This means that unless something changes, deforestation for toilet paper will only accelerate in coming decades. There are alternatives. Bamboo toilet paper has emerged as a sustainable option. Bamboo grows incredibly fast, up to 3 feet in a single day, and reaches maturity in just a few years compared to the decades required for trees. It requires no fertilizers or pesticides, grows in various climates, and can be harvested without killing the plant, which regrows from its root system. Bamboo toilet paper is soft, strong, and functionally equivalent to tree-based paper. It's also more sustainable in every way. Companies like Who Gives a Crap have built their entire business model around bamboo and recycled toilet paper, donating half their profits to build toilets in developing countries. Other companies are following suit, offering bamboo options alongside traditional products. Wheat straw, a byproduct of wheat farming, can also be used to make toilet paper. This agricultural waste would otherwise be burned or left to rot, so turning it into paper makes use of a resource that would go to waste anyway. Sugarcane fibre and other agricultural residues are being explored as well, but these alternatives remain a small fraction of the market. The big brands, the ones with the advertising budgets and shelf space and brand recognition, still rely primarily on virgin tree pulp, and consumers, for the most part, buy what's familiar and advertised, not what's sustainable. The toilet paper industry is worth billions of dollars annually. In America alone, people spend about $6 billion per year on toilet paper. That's a lot of economic power concentrated in an industry that's literally flushing forests down the toilet. The companies involved have little incentive to change unless consumers demand it or governments regulate it, neither of which has happened on a meaningful scale. Some European countries have made more progress on this front. Recycled toilet paper is more common in Europe than in America. Some countries have actually mandated minimum recycled content for tissue products. But even in Europe, virgin pulp remains widely used. The fundamental question is this: how much environmental destruction is acceptable for a product we use once and immediately dispose of? If we applied the same standards to any other consumer product, we'd be horrified. Imagine if every time you wanted to use a paper napkin, it required cutting down a tree. The absurdity would be obvious, yet that's essentially what we're doing with toilet paper, and we've normalised it to such an extent that most people never think about it. The forests are paying the price for our commitment to soft, fluffy toilet paper. The carbon that should be locked away in those ancient trees is going into the atmosphere. The wildlife that depends on old-growth forest habitat is disappearing. The indigenous communities who have lived in and depended on these forests for thousands of years are seeing their traditional territories destroyed. And for what? For a momentary convenience. For a product that advertisers have convinced us we need to be softer, thicker, more luxurious. For something that we literally flush away without a second thought. This is the dirty secret of toilet paper that the industry doesn't want you to think about. Every roll represents environmental destruction on a scale that would be unacceptable in almost any other context. The question is, what are we going to do about it? March 2020 will be remembered for many things, but perhaps the most bizarre was the toilet paper panic. As COVID-19 spread around the world and governments began implementing lockdowns, something strange happened. People started panic buying toilet paper in massive quantities. Grocery store shelves were stripped bare, warehouses sold out, Amazon was indefinitely out of stock, Costco suspended online toilet paper sales entirely. By March 23rd, toilet paper was out of stock at 70% of grocery stores in the United States, and the situation was similar around the world. People were getting into fistfights over the last pack of Charmin. Security guards were stationed in the paper goods aisles. Purchase limits were imposed, 1 pack per customer. In Australia, the panic was so extreme that an Australian newspaper actually printed 8 extra pages in one edition as emergency toilet paper for readers who couldn't find any in stores. From a rational standpoint, the panic made no sense. Toilet paper is manufactured domestically in most countries. The supply chain for toilet paper wasn't disrupted by the pandemic. Factories kept running, trucks kept delivering. There was no rational reason to expect a toilet paper shortage, and yet the shelves went empty and stayed empty for months. So what happened? Why toilet paper of all things? Why not food, or medicine, or other truly essential supplies? The psychology behind it is fascinating and reveals some uncomfortable truths about human behaviour during crises. Multiple factors came together to create the perfect storm of panic buying. First, there was genuine uncertainty. In March 2020, nobody knew how bad the pandemic would get, or how long lockdowns would last. The news was full of scary reports about overwhelmed hospitals, mounting deaths, economic collapse. People didn't know if supply chains would hold up. They didn't know if stores would stay open. They didn't know anything for certain, and humans respond to uncertainty by trying to control what they can control. Second, toilet paper is bulky. A pack of toilet paper takes up a lot of space on a shelf, so even a modest increase in purchases can make shelves look empty very quickly. Once shelves started looking empty, That created a feedback loop. People saw empty shelves and assumed there must be a shortage, so they bought more toilet paper when they found it, which made the shelves even emptier. Third, social media amplified the panic exponentially. Pictures of empty toilet paper aisles spread instantly across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other platforms. These images created fear and urgency. People saw their neighbours and friends panic buying and thought they needed to do the same or risk being left without. The fear spread through social networks faster than the virus itself. Fourth, there's a psychological phenomenon called herd behaviour, where people follow what others are doing without necessarily thinking through whether it makes sense. When you see everyone around you buying toilet paper, you assume they know something you don't, or you don't want to be the only person who didn't stock up. The behaviour becomes self-reinforcing. Fifth, and perhaps most interesting, toilet paper represented something people could control in a situation where they felt powerless. You can't control a virus. You can't control government lockdowns. You can't control the economy collapsing. But you can make sure you have toilet paper. Psychologists call this zero-risk bias. The preference to completely eliminate one type of risk, even if it means ignoring more significant risks. Having a stockpile of toilet paper won't save you from a pandemic, but it gives you a sense of preparedness and control. Professor Stephen Taylor, a clinical psychologist at the University of British Columbia and author of The Psychology of Pandemics, explained that people were engaging in fear-induced shopping. The novel coronavirus scared people because it was new and unknown. When faced with conflicting messages about risk and preparedness, people tend to err on the side of extreme caution. Being told to just wash your hands didn't feel proportionate to the threat, so people did more. The panic buying was also self-fulfilling. What started as perceived scarcity became actual scarcity. Even people who initially thought the panic was silly started buying toilet paper when they could find it, because they worried they might not be able to get it later. Retailers imposed purchase limits, but that just confirmed to shoppers that there was a real shortage. By April 2020, toilet paper sales had increased by 734% compared to the same period the previous year, according to NC Solutions, which tracks consumer packaged goods. That's not a typo, 734%. This created real problems for manufacturers and retailers who were unprepared for such a dramatic spike in demand. Procter & Gamble, maker of Charmin, increased production, but even running factories 24 hours a day, they couldn't keep up. Kimberly-Clark faced the same problem. The issue wasn't a shortage of raw materials or manufacturing capacity in the absolute sense. It was that the entire supply chain was optimized for steady, predictable demand, not a sudden 700% spike. Furthermore, there was a structural issue that most people didn't understand. The toilet paper market is actually split into two distinct categories: consumer and commercial. Consumer toilet paper is the stuff you buy in stores for home use. It comes in large, soft rolls and is often multiple ply. Commercial toilet paper is the thin, scratchy stuff you find in office buildings, schools, restaurants, and other public restrooms. It comes in huge industrial rolls and is designed for durability and cost efficiency, not comfort. These two product lines have completely separate supply chains. Different factories, different distribution networks, different packaging. When lockdowns hit and everyone started staying home, demand for consumer toilet paper skyrocketed, while demand for commercial toilet paper plummeted. But manufacturers couldn't easily shift production from one to the other. The machinery is different, the paper is different, the packaging is different. So you had this bizarre situation where commercial toilet paper manufacturers were seeing orders dry up, while consumer manufacturers were overwhelmed with demand they couldn't meet. Some companies did eventually manage to redirect some commercial production to consumer channels, but it took time and effort. The panic also revealed how lean modern supply chains really are. Manufacturers and retailers had adopted just-in-time inventory systems where they keep only a few weeks' worth of product in warehouses. This saves money on storage and reduces waste. but it means there's no buffer when demand suddenly spikes. The entire system is optimized for efficiency, not resilience. Walmart, Target, and other major retailers were getting only a fraction of their toilet paper orders fulfilled. Amazon prioritized subscription orders, which meant one-time purchases were delayed indefinitely. Costco kept toilet paper in stock in physical stores, but stopped selling it online because they couldn't keep up with demand. The shortage lasted for months. Through April, May, and into June of 2020, toilet paper remained difficult to find in many areas. Manufacturing eventually caught up, but by that point many households had months' worth of toilet paper stockpiled, which meant that when the shortage ended, demand crashed. Manufacturers who had ramped up production suddenly found themselves with too much inventory. The economic impact was significant. The toilet paper industry saw temporary boom times, but the volatility created real problems for planning and production. Workers were put on overtime, then some were laid off when demand normalized. The whole episode demonstrated how fragile modern supply chains can be when faced with unexpected shocks. Interestingly, countries with strong bidet cultures experience far less toilet paper panic. In Japan, where bidets are standard in almost every home, there was some toilet paper hoarding, but it was limited and short-lived. In Middle Eastern countries where water is the primary cleaning method, toilet paper shortages were barely noticed. This raised an interesting question in many people's minds. Why are we so dependent on toilet paper anyway? Countries around the world get by just fine without it, often with better hygiene outcomes. The pandemic forced many Americans and Europeans to confront a question they'd never really considered. Is there a better way? The answer, for much of the world, has always been water. And this brings us to one of the most significant cultural divides in modern hygiene practices, the eternal debate between toilet paper and bidets. If you've travelled to Europe, Asia, the Middle East, or parts of South America, you've probably encountered a bidet. If you're American and haven't travelled much, you might not even know what a bidet is, or you might have vague notions of it being some exotic European fixture for washing feet, or something similarly confused. Let's be clear, a bidet is for washing your bottom after using the toilet. That's it. That's the function. And in many countries around the world, bidets are considered absolutely essential for proper hygiene. The idea of not having a bidet in your bathroom would be as strange to an Italian as the idea of not having toilet paper would be to an American. The bidet was invented in France in the early 1700s. The name comes from the French word for pony, because you sit astride it. Early bidets were standalone fixtures, essentially low basins that you would use after using the chamber pot. They were initially popular among the aristocracy because they represented a more comfortable and thorough method of cleaning than the alternatives. From France, bidets spread across Europe, becoming standard in Italy, Spain, Portugal, and other Mediterranean countries. In Italy, bidets are so important that it's actually illegal to build a new bathroom without one. Try to find a home or apartment in Italy without a bidet. You can't. They're everywhere, considered as essential as the toilet itself. Southern Europe embraced bidets enthusiastically, and they remain standard there today. Northern Europe was slower to adopt them, though Finland developed its own variation called the bidet shower, a handheld spray attachment that serves the same purpose. In France, the country that invented the bidet, they've actually become less common in recent decades as American-style bathrooms have influenced modern construction. Japan took the bidet concept and elevated it to an art form. In the 1980s, Japanese manufacturers began producing electronic toilet seats with built-in bidets, heated seats, adjustable water temperature and pressure, air dryers, deodorizers, and even features like background music to mask embarrassing sounds. These washlet toilets, made primarily by Toto, are found in about 76% of Japanese households as of recent surveys. Walking into a public restroom in Japan can be an overwhelming experience for first-time visitors. The control panel on the wall has more buttons than an airplane cockpit. There are settings for water temperature, pressure, and angle. There's a front wash and a back wash. There's a drying function. Some models even have a powerful setting that you probably want to approach with caution. The Japanese take cleanliness seriously, and the washlet reflects this cultural value. The idea that you would use dry paper to clean yourself seems barbaric to most Japanese people. Water is clearly more effective at cleaning, they argue, and they're not wrong. If you got dirt on your hands, you wouldn't just wipe them with a dry paper towel and call them clean, you'd wash them with water. So why is your bottom any different? The Middle East has its own strong tradition of water-based cleaning, rooted in Islamic religious requirements. Islamic law requires washing with water after using the toilet. This led to the development of various water vessels and eventually to the handheld bidet shower, sometimes called a shataf or bum gun. These are standard fixtures in bathrooms throughout the Middle East, North Africa, and in Muslim communities worldwide. The shataf is exactly what it sounds like, a handheld spray attachment, usually mounted on the wall next to the toilet that you use to wash yourself. It takes a bit of practice to use without spraying water everywhere, but once you get the hang of it, it's effective and hygienic. In many Muslim countries, you won't find toilet paper in bathrooms at all, or if you do, it's there for drying purposes only, not for primary cleaning. India and Southeast Asia have similar water-based traditions. In India, the traditional method involves a vessel of water called a lotta, which you pour with one hand while cleaning with the other. This requires coordination and practice, but it's been working for centuries. Increasingly, Indian bathrooms are being equipped with handheld sprayers, making the process easier. In Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, and other Southeast Asian countries, you'll find water-based cleaning is the norm. The bum gun handheld spray is standard equipment in most bathrooms, and toilet paper, if it's available at all, is used for drying. Western tourists often find this challenging at first, but come to prefer it after giving it a try. So why didn't bidets catch on in the United States and United Kingdom, the two major English-speaking countries that remain stubbornly attached to toilet paper? The answer is a fascinating mix of historical accident, cultural prudishness, and industry influence. During World War II, American soldiers encountered bidets in French brothels. Because they saw them in brothels, many soldiers associated bidets with prostitution and vice. This created a lasting cultural bias against bidets in American culture. They were seen as somehow immoral or sexually inappropriate, which is ridiculous given that they're just a tool for washing, but cultural associations don't have to make sense to be powerful. When American soldiers returned home after the war, they brought this bias with them. The plumbing industry in America had also developed around toilet paper, not bidets. Houses weren't built with the plumbing for standalone bidets, which require a separate water line and drain. To add a bidet to an existing bathroom required significant renovation, which most people weren't willing to undertake for a fixture they'd been taught to view with suspicion. The toilet paper industry also had a vested interest in preventing bidet adoption. By the mid-20th century, toilet paper was a multi-billion-dollar industry in America. If bidets caught on, toilet paper sales would plummet. While there's no evidence of organised conspiracy, the toilet paper industry certainly didn't promote bidets, and their advertising consistently reinforced the message that toilet paper was the normal, civilised way to clean yourself. Cultural prudishness played a role too. Americans have always been somewhat squeamish about bodily functions and anything related to intimate hygiene. Bidets, which require you to actually interact with water and your body, seemed more intimate and therefore more embarrassing than just using paper. The very idea of talking about bidets or asking for them in a store was uncomfortable for many Americans. The result is that the United States remains one of the few developed countries where bidets are rare. You might find them in high-end hotels catering to international travellers, or in the homes of people who have travelled extensively abroad, but they're not standard equipment in American bathrooms. This is changing slowly. The 2020 toilet paper shortage made many Americans suddenly interested in bidets. Sales of bidet attachments, which can be added to existing toilets without major renovation, increased tenfold during the pandemic. Companies like Tushy and others launched aggressive marketing campaigns, positioning bidets as cleaner, more eco-friendly and more comfortable than toilet paper. Modern bidet attachments are relatively inexpensive, starting at around $30, and can be installed in about 15 minutes with basic tools. They connect to your toilet's existing water line and spray water when you activate them. More elaborate electric bidet seats with heated water, drying functions and other features can cost several $100s but offer a spa-like experience. The environmental argument for bidets is compelling. If Americans switched from toilet paper to bidets, it would save 15 million trees per year, according to Scientific American. It would also save 473 billion gallons of water annually, since it takes far more water to manufacture toilet paper than to use a bidet. A bidet uses about 1/8 of a gallon per use. Manufacturing enough toilet paper for that same use requires gallons of water in the production process. From a hygiene standpoint, bidets are objectively better. Water removes fecal matter more thoroughly than dry paper. This reduces the risk of irritation, infection and other issues. Many doctors recommend bidets for people with hemorrhoids, fissures, or other conditions that make wiping painful. Postpartum women often find bidets invaluable. Elderly people with mobility issues can use bidets more easily than toilet paper. Yet American resistance persists. The ick factor is real. The idea of water spraying on your bottom seems weird or uncomfortable to people who've never tried it. There's also the momentum of habit. If you've used toilet paper your whole life, switching to a bidet requires actively deciding to change, and most people don't do that without a compelling reason. But the tide may be turning. Gen Z and millennials, who are more environmentally conscious and more open to new ideas, are adopting bidets at higher rates than previous generations. The pandemic gave bidets a major boost in awareness and acceptance. More companies are entering the market, making bidets easier to find and more affordable. In Europe, bidets remain standard in Southern Europe and are making a comeback in other regions. In Asia, bidet adoption continues to increase, with Japanese-style washlets spreading to South Korea, China and other countries. The Middle East and South Asia remain firmly committed to water-based cleaning. The fundamental question is this: which method is actually better? And the answer depends on what you value. For hygiene, bidets are clearly superior. For environmental impact, bidets are vastly better. For comfort, most people who use bidets regularly prefer them to toilet paper, but toilet paper has advantages too. It's familiar, it requires no special equipment, it's portable, and you can take it with you when you travel. Many people use both, using a bidet for primary cleaning and toilet paper for drying. This hybrid approach offers the benefits of both methods. What's undeniable is that the rest of the world has figured out that cleaning with water is more effective than cleaning with dry paper. The question is whether Americans and other toilet paper-dependent countries will eventually come around to that realization, or whether cultural inertia will keep them committed to trees and paper forever. We've come a long way from Roman sponges and Greek pottery shards. We've built a global industry around toilet paper, cutting down forests and using billions of gallons of water to manufacture a product we use once and flush away. We've created a cultural norm so powerful that people panic buy toilet paper during crises, even when there's no rational reason to expect a shortage. And yet, for all this, half the world still doesn't use toilet paper at all, relying instead on water-based methods that are arguably more hygienic and certainly more sustainable. So where do we go from here? What does the future of bathroom hygiene look like? The trends are pointing in several directions simultaneously, and the outcome will likely vary by region and culture. But some patterns are emerging that give us clues about where things are heading. First, environmental concerns are finally forcing change in the toilet paper industry. After decades of environmental groups calling out major manufacturers for their reliance on virgin forest pulp, we're seeing real movement towards sustainable alternatives. More recycled options are available now than ever before. Bamboo toilet paper, once a niche product, is becoming mainstream. Companies built around sustainability, like Who Gives a Crap, Real Paper and others, are gaining market share. Major manufacturers are feeling the pressure. Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark and Georgia-Pacific have all made commitments to sustainable forestry, though environmental groups argue they're not moving fast enough. Some have started offering recycled or bamboo options alongside their traditional products. The industry is slowly, very slowly, acknowledging that cutting down ancient forests for toilet paper is indefensible. Consumer awareness is increasing too. Younger generations are more environmentally conscious and more willing to switch brands based on sustainability. Social media has made it easier for environmental groups to call out bad actors and promote good ones. The pressure is building, and while change is slow, it's happening. Second, technology is changing the game, particularly in Asia. Japanese-style washlet toilets are spreading beyond Japan. South Korea has embraced them enthusiastically. China is seeing increasing adoption, particularly among the growing middle class. These high-tech toilets offer features that make bidets more appealing even to people who might initially be skeptical about water-based cleaning. The combination of heated water, adjustable pressure, air drying, and deodorizing functions creates a bathroom experience that feels luxurious rather than strange. As these toilets become more affordable and available in more countries, adoption is likely to increase. We're already seeing Western hotel chains installing Japanese-style toilets in their Asian properties because guests expect them. Whether this technology spreads to Western markets remains to be seen. The high-end models are expensive, which limits adoption. But prices are coming down, and simpler bidet attachments are becoming more popular. The pandemic certainly accelerated interest in bidets among Americans and Europeans. Third, we're seeing increased awareness of the health benefits of bidets and the health drawbacks of toilet paper. More doctors are recommending bidets for patients with various conditions. Medical research is increasingly supporting the hygiene advantages of water cleaning. This medical endorsement may help overcome some of the cultural resistance. Fourth, global water scarcity is becoming a concern in many regions, which complicates the bidet versus toilet paper debate. Making toilet paper requires enormous amounts of water, but using a bidet also requires water, and in water-scarce regions that's a consideration. The answer probably involves a combination of approaches: more efficient manufacturing for toilet paper, water recycling systems for bidets, and continued innovation in sustainable alternatives. Fifth, cultural globalization is breaking down some of the traditional barriers. As people travel more, they're exposed to different bathroom practices. Young people in particular are more open to trying methods from other cultures. The rigid cultural norms that kept Americans committed to toilet paper and Italians committed to bidets are softening. That said, cultural habits are incredibly resistant to change. France invented the bidet but is seeing declining usage. America has been resistant to bidets for 80 years and counting. Japan has perfected the electronic bidet but still uses it in combination with toilet paper. Cultural practices around bathroom hygiene are deeply ingrained and not easily changed by logic or environmental arguments. What seems likely is that we'll see increasing diversity rather than convergence. Some people will use recycled or bamboo toilet paper, some will switch to bidets, some will use both. Some will continue using traditional toilet paper despite the environmental cost. Regional variations will persist based on water availability, cultural norms, and economic factors. The toilet paper industry will continue to exist, but it will hopefully become more sustainable. The major manufacturers will, eventually, be forced to move away from virgin old-growth forest pulp toward recycled materials, bamboo, wheat straw, and other sustainable sources. This change will happen through a combination of regulatory pressure, consumer demand, and environmental activism. Bidets will likely continue to spread, particularly in the form of simple attachments that can be added to existing toilets. The Japanese-style electronic toilets will remain a luxury product in most markets, but may become more common in high-end hotels and homes. Water-based cleaning will remain the norm in most of Asia, the Middle East, and parts of Europe and South America. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Individual consumer choices, while important, probably won't be enough to solve the environmental crisis created by the toilet paper industry. Real change will require government regulation, industry transformation, and fundamental shifts in how we think about disposable consumer products. Some countries might follow the example of those that have mandated minimum recycled content in tissue products. Others might implement carbon taxes that make virgin pulp more expensive relative to recycled materials. Others might subsidize sustainable alternatives or provide tax incentives for bidet installation. These policy interventions could accelerate change far more than consumer choice alone. The forest conservation movement is making progress. More old-growth forests are being protected. The Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement set aside huge areas for conservation. Similar efforts are underway in other regions, but protection needs to go further and happen faster. The forests being cut down today took centuries to grow. Once they're gone, they're gone. And no amount of tree planting can recreate what was lost. Meanwhile, the fundamental absurdity remains. We're destroying ancient forests, using massive amounts of water and energy, releasing pollutants and greenhouse gases, all to create a product that we use for seconds and then flush away. When you step back and really think about it, the whole system seems insane. Our descendants will look back at us the way we look back at the Romans sharing a communal sponge on a stick. They'll wonder why we accepted such an obviously unsustainable system. They'll wonder why we were so resistant to alternatives that were cleaner, more sustainable, and more hygienic. But they'll also hopefully see that we started to change. That when faced with the evidence of environmental destruction, some people began to demand better. That the panic of 2020, absurd as it was, made people question assumptions they'd never questioned before. That a new generation grew up more conscious of environmental impact and more willing to break with tradition. The future of bathroom hygiene will be determined by the choices we make now. Do we continue cutting down forests for a product we flush away? Or do we embrace sustainable alternatives? Do we cling to cultural norms that no longer make sense? Or do we open ourselves to better methods? Do we let the industry continue business as usual? Or do we demand change? These might seem like small questions, almost comically so. We're talking about toilet paper after all. But the small choices add up. The habits we form matter. The industries we support shape the world. And the forests we save or don't save will determine the health of our planet for generations to come. So what have we learned on this journey through the history of toilet paper? That humans are endlessly creative in solving problems, even unglamorous ones. That cultural norms are powerful but not permanent. That what we flush away has consequences we rarely consider. That the rest of the world might have figured out things we're still getting wrong. The story of toilet paper is, in the end, the story of us. It's about innovation and industry, about squeamishness and social norms, about convenience and cost, about forests and futures. It's about the choices we make every day without thinking and the impact those choices have on the world. Next time you reach for a roll of toilet paper, take a moment to think about where it came from. Was it made from old-growth forest trees that took centuries to grow? Or recycled paper that gave new life to material that would otherwise be waste? Or bamboo that grew back in months? Your choice matters more than you might think. And if you're in a country where toilet paper isn't the norm, where water is the way people clean themselves, remember that you're following a tradition that's thousands of years old and shared by billions of people. You're not strange or backward or primitive. You're just doing things differently, and arguably better in some ways. The pandemic taught us that toilet paper matters to people in ways that go beyond pure function. It represents security, normalcy, control in an uncertain world. That's okay. But it also taught us that our dependence on toilet paper is a choice, not a necessity. A choice that has consequences for forests and wildlife and climate and future generations. We can make different choices. We can demand sustainable products. We can try water-based alternatives. We can pressure manufacturers to change their practices. We can vote for politicians who will protect forests. We can tell our friends and family about what we've learned, or we can keep doing what we've always done, flushing forests down the toilet one roll at a time. The choice is ours, the forests are waiting, the future is watching. If you enjoyed diving into this surprisingly complex and important topic with me, please hit that like button and subscribe to History Somnia. We explore history's hidden stories and make sense of the past in ways you've never considered before. Drop a comment below. Are you going to rethink your toilet paper choices? Have you ever used a bidet? What surprised you most about this story? I read every comment and love hearing from you. Thanks for spending this time with me exploring one of history's dirtiest secrets. Until next time, remember, every choice we make, even the small ones, even the ones we never think about, shapes the world we leave behind. See you in the next video.